We've all been told the same story for as long as we can remember. Be happier, be healthier, be more successful, be more productive, be more confident, be more everything. From the moment we wake up until we fall asleep, we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us that we're not enough yet. There's always something missing. A better job, a better body, a better relationship, a better mindset. We're taught, subtly and sometimes aggressively, that the key to a better life is always more. More money, more experiences, more validation, more positivity. Social media amplifies this idea even further. Perfect vacations, perfect homes, perfect bodies, perfect smiles captured from the right angle, with the right filter at the right moment. Even happiness itself has become something we're supposed to optimize, track, and display, as if life were a competition where everyone else is winning and you're somehow falling behind. But here's the uncomfortable question no one likes to ask. What if this obsession with feeling good all the time is exactly what's making us feel so bad? What if constantly chasing happiness, success, and positivity is actually the source of our anxiety, our dissatisfaction, and our sense that something is wrong with us? In this video, we're going to explore a radically different way of looking at life, one that goes against everything we've been taught. Instead of trying to care about everything, we'll talk about the power of choosing what truly matters and deliberately letting go of the rest. Because the truth is your time, energy, and emotional capacity are limited. And when you try to care about everything, you end up caring about nothing that truly counts. We'll dive into why happiness isn't something you can chase without consequences, why believing that you're special in the way society sells it to you can actually hold you back, and why failure isn't something to be avoided, but embraced. We'll even confront one of the most uncomfortable topics of all, mortality, not as something dark or depressing, but as a powerful reminder that gives meaning to your choices. By the end of this video, you might not feel instantly happier, and that's the point. Instead, you'll start seeing your problems differently. You'll realize that struggle is not a sign of failure, but a natural part of a meaningful life. And paradoxically, by accepting what you can't control, you may finally feel a sense of freedom you've been chasing for years. Part 1. The feedback loop from hell. There's a subtle but dangerous flaw built into the human brain, one that can slowly drive us crazy if we're not aware of it. It starts simply. You feel anxious about a confrontation, an upcoming decision, or a difficult situation. That's normal. But then something strange happens. You become anxious about the fact that you're anxious. You think, why am I feeling this way? I shouldn't be this nervous. What's wrong with me? Or maybe you get angry. And instead of letting that anger pass, you turn inward. You get angry about being angry. You feel guilty, ashamed, weak. This is what's known as a feedback loop from hell. A mental trap where we don't just feel bad, but we feel bad about feeling bad. And once this loop starts, it feeds on itself. Anxiety creates more anxiety. Anger creates guilt. Guilt creates shame. And suddenly, the original problem no longer matters. The problem becomes you. Modern culture makes this loop even worse. We live in a world that treats negative emotions as defects. Anxiety is seen as weakness. Fear is failure. Sadness means something is broken inside you. Social media and consumer culture constantly show us polished lives filled with confidence, happiness, and success, sending the message that feeling bad is unacceptable. So we internalize a dangerous belief that negative experiences are not okay. And once you believe that, every uncomfortable emotion becomes a personal failure. Anxiety isn't just anxiety anymore. It's proof you're not good enough. Fear isn't a warning. It's evidence that you're falling behind. Now here's where things flip completely. The desire for more positive experience is itself a negative experience, and the acceptance of a negative experience is itself a positive one. This is the backwards law. The more desperately you want to be happy, rich, or fulfilled, the more you reinforce the feeling that you're lacking. Every desire quietly reminds you of what you don't have, and that reminder repeated over time, creates emptiness, not motivation. But something powerful happens the moment you stop fighting your bad feelings, when you stop trying to fix them, when you stop judging them, when you stop hating yourself for having them. The moment you say, I feel like shit and that's okay, the loop begins to break. You're no longer anxious about being anxious. You're no longer angry about being angry. You're simply experiencing emotion without adding another layer of suffering on top. And that acceptance doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. Because when you stop giving a fuck that you feel bad, the feedback loop from hell loses its power. Part 2. Happiness is a problem. We often think of happiness as something we can solve, almost like a mathematical equation. We tell ourselves, if I get this job, if I reach this income, if I look a certain way, then I'll finally be happy. Happiness becomes a destination. Something just slightly out of reach, always waiting on the other side of the next achievement. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Happiness is not a problem you can permanently solve. Human beings are not designed to be satisfied all the time. Biologically, psychologically, and emotionally, we are wired to feel a mild sense of dissatisfaction and insecurity. And that's not a flaw, it's a feature. That tension is what pushes us to adapt, to grow, to innovate, and ultimately to survive. If our ancestors had been perfectly content, they wouldn't have explored, invented, or improved anything. Comfort alone never built a future. This means something important. Problems don't disappear. They don't go away once you make it. They only change form. Every level of life comes with its own set of problems. A homeless person has money problems. A billionaire has money problems. The difference isn't the absence of struggle. It's the quality of the struggle. Warren Buffett doesn't worry about paying rent, but he deals with responsibility, pressure, and risk on a scale most people can't imagine. He simply has better problems. And this is where most people get it wrong. We think happiness comes from eliminating problems, from reaching a point where nothing hurts, nothing is uncertain, and nothing challenges us anymore. But that version of life doesn't exist. The attempt to escape all problems doesn't lead to happiness. It leads to frustration, anxiety, and paralysis. Real happiness comes from solving problems, not avoiding them. Fulfillment happens when you engage with challenges that feel meaningful to you, when the struggle itself feels worth it, when the pain has a purpose. Because without struggle, there is no growth. And without growth, even pleasure becomes empty. That's why the better question isn't, what do I want to enjoy? The better question is, what kind of pain am I willing to sustain? Because everything worthwhile in life comes bundled with discomfort. A great relationship demands vulnerability, conflict, and emotional risk. A successful career demands stress, failure, and long periods of uncertainty. A strong, healthy body demands discipline, fatigue, and discomfort. There is no reward without its corresponding cost. And the people who feel fulfilled aren't the ones who avoided pain. They're the ones who chose their pain consciously. They chose the struggles they were willing to endure and committed to them. In the end, your success isn't determined by what you want. It's determined by what you're willing to struggle for, what you're willing to sacrifice comfort for, what problems you're willing to wake up and face every single day. That's where real happiness lives. Not in a life without problems, but in a life with problems that matter. Part 3. The tyranny of exceptionalism. We live in a culture obsessed with being exceptional. From a young age, we're told that every single one of us is special, unique, destined for greatness. That we could be extraordinary, massively successful, admired, and remembered. If only we try hard enough, believe strongly enough, and never settle. But here's the reality no one likes to say out loud. Most of us are pretty average at most things. And that's not an insult. It's a statistical fact. In today's world, we're constantly exposed to the extremes of human experience. Media doesn't show us normal lives. It shows us the 99.98th percentile, the richest, the smartest, the most attractive, the most successful, or the complete disasters at the other end of the spectrum, the best of the best, the worst of the worst, almost nothing in between. And when you consume that kind of information every single day, something dangerous happens. Average stops feeling normal. It starts feeling like failure. So if you're not exceptional, not winning big, not standing out, not constantly improving, you assume something is wrong with you. You feel insecure, invisible, left behind, because everyone else, at least from the outside, seems to be doing better. This pressure to be exceptional creates a strange psychological side effect: entitlement. And entitlement comes in two flavors. The first sounds confident. I'm amazing and everyone else sucks, so I deserve special treatment. The second sounds insecure. I'm terrible and everyone else is amazing, so I deserve special treatment. They look different, but they're the same thing. Both are ways of avoiding the uncomfortable, boring, unglamorous truth of life, that most of existence is mundane, repetitive, ordinary. And that's not a problem to be fixed. The real path to emotional health isn't found in chasing greatness at all costs. It's found in what you might call eating your vegetables, doing the unsexy work, accepting that your life will mostly be unremarkable, that most days won't feel meaningful or dramatic, that you won't be a genius, a hero, or a victim. And that's okay, because the moment you accept your own ordinary existence, something powerful happens. The pressure lifts. You stop measuring every moment against an imaginary standard of greatness. You stop needing to prove that you're special. And paradoxically, that's when real progress becomes possible. Not because you're trying to be extraordinary, but because you're finally free to focus, free to work without the constant fear of failure, free to improve without the need for applause, free to pursue what actually matters to you, not what looks impressive to others. When you let go of the tyranny of exceptionalism, you don't become less, you become grounded. And from that grounded place, you can actually build something meaningful, sustainable, and real, not as a genius, not as a victim, but as a human being. Part 4, the self-awareness onion. Self-awareness isn't something you either have or don't have. It's not a switch you turn on. It's more like an onion made of layers, and most people never get past the surface. The first layer of self-awareness is the most basic one, simply recognizing what you feel. You notice that you're anxious, angry, frustrated, ashamed, sad. This alone already puts you ahead of many people, because a lot of us walk through life disconnected from our emotions, reacting without understanding what's actually happening inside. But awareness doesn't stop there. The second layer begins when you ask a harder question. Why do I feel this way? Why does this situation make me anxious? Why does this criticism bother me so much? Why does failure feel so threatening? At this level, you start uncovering your hidden definitions of success and failure. You realize that emotions aren't random, they're signals. They point toward expectations, beliefs, and assumptions you didn't even know you were carrying. You start seeing the rules you've been living by without ever consciously choosing them. And then there's the third layer, the deepest one, the most uncomfortable, and the most important. This is where you ask, by what standard am I judging myself? This is a layer of values. Your values determine what feels like a problem in your life. And the quality of your problems determines the quality of your life. You can't avoid problems, but you can choose better ones by choosing better values. If your values are things like always being right, always feeling good, or always being seen as successful, you're setting yourself up for problems that can never be solved. Because reality doesn't care about your need to be right. Life doesn't guarantee positivity. And success, as defined by other people, is always unstable. These are bad values, not because they're immoral, but because they're disconnected from reality. They're external, out of your control, dependent on other people, luck, or circumstances. Good values are different. Good values are grounded, internal, actionable. They're things you can live by even when life gets messy. Values like honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Vulnerability, even when it feels risky. Curiosity, even when you don't like what you might discover. Responsibility, effort, integrity. When you adopt better values, your problems change. You don't suddenly get rid of struggle, but your struggles become meaningful, solvable, worth engaging with. And this is what self-improvement actually is. It's not about fixing yourself. It's not about becoming perfect. It's not about eliminating pain. It's about prioritizing better values. Values that create better problems. Problems that move you forward instead of trapping you in cycles of frustration and self-judgment. Peel back the onion far enough, and you don't find a flawless version of yourself. You find clarity. And that clarity changes everything. Part 5. Radical responsibility. Often, the only real difference between a problem that destroys you and a problem that strengthens you is one simple thing: the sense that you chose it and that you are responsible for it. Pain by itself is unavoidable. Everyone suffers. Everyone struggles. But what gives pain its power or takes it away is the story you tell yourself about it. The moment you believe that your life is happening to you, that you're a passive victim of circumstances, problems become heavier, darker, and harder to bear. Now, here's an important distinction that most people never fully understand: the difference between fault and responsibility. Something can happen that is not your fault at all. You might have been betrayed, robbed, abandoned, lied to. You might have grown up in a difficult environment or been born with limitations you didn't choose. None of that is fair, and none of it is your fault. But it is always your responsibility to deal with the consequences. Responsibility doesn't mean blame. It means ownership. It means recognizing that while you don't control what happens to you, you do control how you interpret it, how you respond to it, and what you decide to do next. And that choice, how you respond, is where your power lives. Life is a lot like a game of poker. You don't get to choose the cards you're dealt. Some people start with strong hands. Others start with terrible ones. Complaining about the cards doesn't change the game. Refusing to play doesn't make you win. The only thing that matters is how you play the hand you have. The winner isn't the one with the best cards. It's the one who makes the best decisions with the cards they're given. When you take radical responsibility for your problems, something shifts. You stop waiting to be rescued. You stop needing the world to be fair before you move forward. You stop outsourcing your sense of control. And this isn't easy. Taking responsibility is uncomfortable. It forces you to look at your life honestly. It removes the safety of excuses. It demands effort, reflection, and sometimes painful self-awareness. But it also does something else. It gives you back your agency. Because the moment you say, "This is my problem and I will deal with it," you open the door to learning, to growth, to real change. Not overnight transformation, but steady, grounded improvement. Blame keeps you stuck. Responsibility moves you forward. And that's why radical responsibility isn't about being harsh on yourself. It's about respecting yourself enough to take ownership of your life. No matter what hand you were dealt, how you play it is always up to you. Part 6. You're wrong about everything. Growth is not a straight line, and it's definitely not a journey from wrong to right. It's an endlessly iterative process. We don't suddenly arrive at truth and stay there forever. Instead, we move from being wrong to being slightly less wrong, and then slightly less wrong than that. This is why certainty is so dangerous. The moment you become certain about who you are, what you believe, how the world works, you stop growing. Certainty feels comforting, but it freezes you in place. It locks you into outdated ideas, habits, and identities that no longer serve you. Growth doesn't come from confidence in your answers. It comes from curiosity about your doubts. Instead of striving for certainty, real growth requires something counterintuitive: a constant willingness to question yourself, to doubt your beliefs, to doubt your emotional reactions, to doubt the stories you tell yourself about what things mean. Because the truth is, your mind is wrong far more often than you think. And this brings us to something known as Manson's law of avoidance. The more something threatens your identity, the more strongly you will avoid it, not because it's impossible, but because it feels dangerous. Anything that challenges how you see yourself creates fear. This is why people often avoid the very things that could help them the most. And that's also why people are often just as afraid of success as they are failure. Failure threatens your self-image by confirming your worst fears. Success threatens your self-image by demanding that you become someone new. Both force change, and change is uncomfortable. So instead of facing that discomfort, we cling to rigid identities. We say, "This is just who I am." We define ourselves as special, unique, gifted, broken, talented, misunderstood, anything that feels solid enough to protect us from uncertainty. But those identities become cages. The solution is radical and unsettling. You have to kill yourself, not literally, but psychologically. You have to let go of the fixed stories you tell yourself about who you are. Stop trying to be special. Stop trying to be unique. Stop defending an identity that no longer fits the reality of your life. Define yourself in the simplest, most ordinary ways possible. You're a student, a friend, a learner, a creator. These identities are flexible. They're non-threatening. They leave room for growth. And because they don't need constant protection, they allow you to act without fear of shattering who you think you are. When you stop clinging to being someone specific, you become freer to become better. Because growth doesn't require certainty. It requires humility. It requires doubt. And it requires the courage to admit that you're probably wrong, and that's okay. Part 7. Failure is the way forward. If someone is better than you at something, there's a simple reason for that. They've failed at it more times than you have. We like to believe that success comes from talent, intelligence, or confidence. But in reality, mastery is almost always a result of repeated failure. The people who seem effortless, skilled, or gifted didn't avoid mistakes. They accumulated them. They survived embarrassment, frustration, rejection, and doubt long enough to learn from them. This leads to an uncomfortable truth. You can only be truly successful at something you are willing to fail at. If you're not prepared to fail, you're not actually committed. You're just fantasizing. This is why many of the goals we set for ourselves quietly fail us. Goals like graduate from college, buy a house, or get a better job sound meaningful, but they're destination-based. Once you reach them, they're over. And if you don't reach them fast enough, they turn into sources of anxiety and self-judgment. The problem isn't ambition. The problem is how we define success. Better values are not about destinations. They're about processes. Instead of valuing being successful, value learning consistently. Instead of valuing being admired, value expressing yourself honestly. Instead of valuing winning, value showing up and improving. Process-based values are never finished. They're problems you engage with again and again for the rest of your life. And because they don't rely on a final outcome, they make failure survivable and even useful. This becomes especially important when you feel stuck, when motivation disappears, when everything feels heavy, when you don't know what the right move is. That's when you apply what's called the do something principle. We often think motivation comes first and action comes second, but that's backwards. Action isn't just a result of motivation. It's also the cause of it. Waiting to feel ready is one of the easiest ways to stay frozen. So, if you don't know what to do something, anything. Send an email, write one paragraph. Take a short walk. Make the call. Start badly. Action creates feedback. Feedback creates clarity. And clarity creates motivation. When you redefine success as simply acting, everything changes. Progress no longer depends on winning. Even failure becomes movement. Even mistakes push you forward. Even confusion becomes part of the process. Failure stops being the opposite of success. It becomes the path to it. Because the people who move forward aren't the ones who avoid falling. They're the ones who fall and keep going. Part 8. The power of saying no. We live in a culture obsessed with saying yes. Yes to opportunities. Yes to options. Yes to more experiences, more connections, more possibilities. We're taught that keeping doors open is freedom. That rejecting something means missing out. But what we rarely hear is this simple truth. You are defined just as much by what you reject as by what you accept. If you reject nothing, you stand for nothing. And if you stand for nothing, you don't really have an identity. To truly value something, you have to limit yourself to it. You have to choose it. And in doing so, reject the alternatives. Every meaningful commitment is a narrowing. And that narrowing isn't weakness. It's focus. This applies to everything. Careers, creative paths, hobbies. But nowhere is it more important and more misunderstood than in relationships. We like to talk about love as openness, flexibility, and endless compromise. But healthy relationships aren't built on limitless access. They're built on boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They're clarity. They're the clear line between what is your responsibility and what is not, between your problems and your partner's problems, between what you can support and what you cannot fix. A healthy relationship isn't two people constantly trying to solve each other's problems in order to feel good about themselves. That leads to resentment, dependence, and emotional exhaustion. Instead, a healthy relationship is when two people take responsibility for their own problems so that they can genuinely enjoy being together. You solve your problems so you can show up fully. They solve theirs for the same reason. And this brings us to commitment. Commitment often feels scary because it looks like a loss of freedom. When you commit, you're saying no to other options, other paths, other people, other versions of life. And that can feel suffocating, at least on the surface. But here's the paradox. Commitment doesn't reduce freedom. It transforms it. Staying open keeps life shallow. Commitment gives it depth. When you commit, you gain access to experiences that only exist on the other side of limitation. Trust, intimacy, mastery, growth. Depth is where meaning is built. Depth is where fulfillment lives. And depth requires saying no. No to distractions. No to constant comparison. No to the illusion that you can have everything without choosing anything. Because the truth is, the gold isn't buried in endless options. It's buried in depth. And depth only becomes possible the moment you decide what matters enough to reject everything else. Part 9. The sunny side of death. Death is the quiet background against which all meaning in life is measured. It's the light that gives shape to every shadow. Without death, nothing would really matter. If time were infinite, choices would lose their weight. Mistakes would be meaningless. Love would be casual. Life itself would feel flat and inconsequential. And yet, most of us spend our lives trying not to think about this. We distract ourselves by building what can be called immortality projects. We chase achievements, recognition, success, status, legacy, anything that makes our conceptual self feel permanent. We tell ourselves that if we build something big enough, meaningful enough, or memorable enough, some part of us will live forever. Work becomes an attempt to matter. Fame becomes proof of existence. Family becomes continuity. None of these things are bad, but when they're used to deny death, they quietly hollow us out. They become distractions rather than expressions of meaning. The irony is this: death doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it precious. The moment you truly confront your mortality, not intellectually, but emotionally, something profound happens. All the shallow values start to collapse. Popularity stops mattering as much. Comparison loses its grip. Ego-driven goals feel strangely empty. The noise fades. And in that silence, one question rises above all others. What will actually matter when I'm gone? Not what will impress people. Not what will make me look successful. But what will leave something better behind? How did I treat people? What did I contribute? What did I stand for when it mattered? This is what legacy really is. Not fame, not monuments, but impact. Often small, often invisible, but real. When you accept that you can die, you gain a rare kind of freedom. You're no longer forced to chase values that promise symbolic immortality. You're no longer trapped by the need to prove yourself endlessly. You can choose your values honestly, based on what feels meaningful, not what looks impressive. And here's the most important realization of all. You don't need to become great to justify your existence. You already are enough, not because of what you've achieved, not because of what you own, not because of how you'll be remembered, but because, in the face of certain death, you still choose to care. You still choose what matters. You still decide, every day, what is worth your time, your energy, and your attention. That choice, to give a fuck in a finite life, is what gives life its deepest meaning. Death doesn't take meaning away. It gives it shape. Reminding yourself of your own fragility changes everything, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, grounding one. When you remember how temporary you are, life becomes lighter. Fear loses some of its weight. Failure stops feeling like a final verdict. Pain becomes something you can move through, instead of something that defines you. You stop demanding perfection from yourself and from life. And that alone makes suffering more bearable. Accepting your fragility doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest. It allows you to face your fears without pretending they shouldn't exist. To accept your failures without turning them into a story about your worth. And to take responsibility for your life. Not because everything is your fault, but because it's the only place where real power lives. This isn't about becoming fearless, endlessly positive, or extraordinary. It's about choosing what matters, letting go of what doesn't, and carrying your problems with a little more grace and a little less self-hatred. Life will always be messy, confusing, uncertain, and that's not a flaw. It's the price of being human. If this shift in perspective resonated with you, and if you want more content about navigating the beautiful, complicated circus of being human, consider subscribing. We're not here to fix life, but to understand a little better, one step at a time.